Hello, everybody. It is 3:30, which of course means it is time for one of our, what are we calling these? I want to say after school STEM shows, but school's out. It's been out for a while, so we're just calling them afternoon STEM show, Headwaters Science Center Science Live shows. There we go. And today we're doing kind of a follow-up to a show we did a couple days ago. Those of you who watched on Wednesday watched Lee read a book called Worms for Breakfast, which is a book that was all about zoos and how they prepare food for their animals. So, and we don't really brand ourselves as a zoo. We don't really consider ourselves to be a zoo, but we do have a lot of live animals here, so we end up doing a lot of the same stuff that these zoos do as far as care for their animals, and that includes doing things like food prep for them. And before we go any further, I'm going to drop my mask down just for understandability's sake. I will say I am vaccinated, and I'm back here pretty isolated, so I'm not too worried about passing on potential COVID here, so I'm going to drop my mask down. The other thing, I guess one more thing before we get going here, is we are talking about food prep, and we have a very, very kind co-op in downtown Bemidji that helps us out a ton with our animals, particularly on the food end. So big shout outs to Harmony Co-op in downtown Bemidji. Basically any fruits or veggies that you're gonna see out on the floor here or in the refrigerator, once we go over there and check that out, they come from Harmony. So basically as soon as their food gets, a day past sellable, they put it in a big crate for us, and we go over there a couple times a week and pick up food for them. And as I said, that's basically all of our produce that we have here, which is most of what we feed out, as you'll soon see. But anyway, as I said, he read this book called Worms for Breakfast that was talking all about the way that zoos do food prep for their animals. And like I said, we do a lot of the same stuff here. In particular, one of the things I was kind of interested in from my perspective was they have this page that kind of talks about the whole kitchen and how they're oriented. And I will say the kitchen that is oriented, or the kitchen that is shown on here, is from a place that's operating on a much larger scale than we are, probably has a lot more resources than we have here. So they do a few things here that we don't do, or don't have the space to do, to be honest. And so things like, for example, you can see this guy who's coming in with his rain galoshes type of boots there, and he's stepping into a pool of disinfectant before he even enters the room. We don't do that. We don't have that here. I've been at a few different places that have done sort of animal food prep, and I've only seen one of them that has something like that. That was the Wellington Zoo in New Zealand. It's probably the biggest one of these places that I've worked at, and their kitchen did look a lot like this. They actually had a couple different kitchens that they used for different areas of the zoo and different types of animals. But even see, there is things that are different, but you'll see a lot of similarities here too, where the types of things that they're feeding, for example, is, you see this guy over here, he's got some fruits and veggies, and this guy over here, he's got his meat. We don't use different surfaces like these guys are doing for the meat versus the fruits and veggies. It's probably good practice, but again, it's just a matter of something that takes up more space than we necessarily are going to be doing here. But you can see they're feeding out very similar types of stuff, using very similar types of tools that we do. Scales are a great thing to have, and you'll see in basically any food prep kitchen anywhere for animals is scales, because generally how you're deciding how much food they're going to get is going to be by weight. We don't use it as much here as a lot of places do. One set of animals that we are pretty particular about the weight that they're consuming, though, is the raptors upstairs. So the owl and the hawk and the falcon all are on a pretty specific diet as far as the weight of food that they get, because managing their weight is of particular importance to us. And then you can see all these little separate bins under here that have different types of different kind of dry foods in them. And the bins are, handy for keeping things like mice out of there. Mice and rats are a constant struggle in any place like this, because it turns out when you have a bunch of seeds and hay and veggies around, who's going to come in and check that out but the wild animals that live in that same area? And so we don't use the plastic bins as much here. We more use these metal cans that I'm sitting on, which maybe you can see. And so some of these are for food, some of these are for other things. So like the one that's probably just off camera over here has shavings in it, so that's like litter for the rabbits. Litter box is in there. But we do have this can here, has a bag for the rabbit's food in it. The pellet food that the rabbit gets is in there. This one I think is empty right now. Oh no, there's straw in it. No, this one's the empty one. And so this one, when we haven't for a couple years now because of COVID, but when we have baby chicks, this is the food that the baby chicks food is in, or the bin. And then down here we have a plastic tub that has Timothy hay in it. I'm actually going to take a handful of this because we're going to be feeding one of our critters today that actually likes eating Timothy hay. And so we're going to take a trip around the corner here. And put this on his plate here. See, even the plate we use just a frisbee. And so generally we have a pretty consistent schedule with how we feed our animals. Generally Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are going to be days when most of the omnivores eat. So those are going to be any of the animals that are eating both meat and veggies. And so that's lizards, that's most of the turtles, are going to be on that 3 times a week schedule. Usually Tuesday and Thursday are cricket feeding days with a couple other ones mixed in there for some specific critters, but generally Tuesday and Thursday is the big day that we feed out crickets. And then we have a handful of things that eat every day or nearly every day. So like the raptors upstairs eat 6 times a week. Angel the parrot gets food every day. Popey the cockatiel always has food. The rabbits and the guinea pigs all get fed every single day. Basically, it's based on how much they need, and the trend you may have noticed there is the warm-blooded animals need to eat more than the cold-blooded animals do. So basically anything that's here that's cold-blooded or that's warm-blooded is going to be eating at least 5 or 6 times a week, if not every single day. Whereas the cold-blooded stuff, metabolic load isn't as big, so they don't need to consume as many calories to maintain their weight. And even at that, like feeding them too much can be detrimental to their health. They could get overweight, which is pretty regularly a problem in places like this, is that a lot of these animals aren't getting as much exercise as they would out in the wild. And so you combine, not getting as much exercise as they would out in the wild with an excess of food, and oftentimes, I don't want to say overly nutritious, but very nutritious, healthy meals given in excess can oftentimes result in animals that are overweight, like I said, in a lot of places like this. And it's a thing we've struggled with a little bit in the past here off and on. We have a couple animals right now that are a little on the heavy side. Cough, cough, the smaller bearded dragon. But it is something that when we notice an animal is getting a little bit heavier, we will make an adjustment to the diet. So one that you probably heard me make reference to before during the snake feeding is Sophie the corn snake. Is one where we were feeding her a normal adult-sized mouse for the first few months that we had her. We noticed she was getting a little bit chunky. We noticed she was putting on a little bit of weight. We were starting to see the skin between the scales a little bit, which is not something you want to see. And so what we did is basically we just downsized her meal. We dropped her down a size grade on the mouse. We kept feeding her at the same rate, and she's down to a healthy weight now. So we will adjust as needed. And I got Angie behind the camera with me, and I'm sure you do the same thing with the birds as well. So that I know in particular is it the red-tailed hawk that changes his diet kind of seasonally a lot of the time too. So when does he get more food?
Springtime. So like when if they were wild, they would be getting ready to head out somewhere, and so he just wants to eat. And then dead of the winter, kind of chills out a little bit.
Yeah. So seasonality is something that plays into it too. So we're talking about the hawk there, but it's very true for the reptiles as well, because their metabolism is very closely tied to their body temperature. When they get warmer, their body processes start moving faster, and they start wanting to eat more. And so, one who that is very, very, very particularly true for is our desert tortoise, who for about 5 to 6 months out of the year, his metabolism is so slow that she is just asleep the whole time. So she usually goes under. I try and keep her up, honestly. She wants to go to sleep usually in October, but I try and keep her up until November. And then she goes into hibernation, and then she wakes up in like March, April, generally. And then when she wakes up, because she hasn't eaten in, like I said, 5 or 6 months, she is one that very much likes to eat and likes to eat a lot. And so she is the rare one here who will oftentimes get multiple plates of food a day. And so that desert tortoise has already eaten 1 plate of food today. And so what we're going to be prepping here is an afternoon kind of second plate for her to enjoy here. And so I took a handful of that Timothy hay from the bin that I showed you there. Hay and grasses should be a large part of the diet for tortoises. And so this is something we would also give to things like the guinea pigs and the rabbits, or the rabbit as well. Lots of stuff likes hay, it's good fiber, it's easy prep. And then what we're going to do is we're going to mix in a few different fruits and veggies, kind of as a snack for, like I said, there's definitely nutritional value to it too. But a lot of it is just kind of mixing up the diet, giving them a chance to experience different foods. Feeding time is a great opportunity to present some enrichment opportunities to the animals. And so enrichment would be anything that we as caregivers for these animals are doing to make the animal's life experience better that isn't just like a core survival thing. So you'll see in a lot of places like this, and this actually gets mentioned in the book. You want to toss me the book there? I left it up there. One of the things that they showed was this page here. There's a couple pages that touch on it, but you can see they have a parrot here, and the parrot has sort of a puzzle box little mechanism there to get to the food. And so in order to get to the food, she has to kind of solve a little puzzle there. Or you'll see, is it back here? Yeah, the tiger having the food presented as like a chunk of frozen blood with a bone in it, so it's a different presentation of food that that animal isn't used to getting. And this is stuff that you will see, like I said, a lot of places doing is these different presentation opportunities as enrichment. The fish one is fun. When I worked at the Great Lakes Aquarium, and one of the things we would do around Halloween is we would put pumpkins into their tanks, and a lot of the fish will eat the insides of the pumpkin. It's not toxic for them. It's fine. But it's a different food, it's a different presentation, and it has the benefit of being fun for the guests to enjoy. And that was something that it touched on too, is kind of doing sort of celebratory things, holiday things, birthday things, whatever. The animals don't care about it. You know, the snapping turtle had a birthday earlier this month. She doesn't know, she doesn't care. But doing things like celebrating a snapping turtle's birthday is a great opportunity to draw more attention to the snapping turtle and the ecological plights that they maybe are facing. So, like I said, the animals themselves don't necessarily know about it, but I love having holidays for the animals, specifically for that reason, to draw attention to a specific animal and whatever educational purposes and environmental purposes that are associated with that as well. And so, we'll check out our refrigerator here. And we have a couple of refrigerators around the Science Center. We have 3 of them. And this one is used exclusively for animal food. And I guess there's a couple dead frozen animals in there as well that we're a place where folks can come, and if they find dead animals out in the wild, they can bring them in. So like you'll specifically see it. Don't just scrape up roadkill and bring it in here. But things that are on some sort of protected list, the DNR, the state likes to have those types of things documented. So, like, there's a dead, is it like a hawk that's in the bottom there somewhere? So, that's in there. But also, mostly animal food in there is what we're more talking about here. And so, very important thing in any place like this, you have separate refrigerators for separate things. We have an animal fridge, we have a human fridge that's in the break room that anybody who's bringing their lunches in or whatever uses. We have another refrigerator and freezer upstairs that mostly gets used for food, and then like refrigeratables that are used for like science club activities and stuff like that. Live in that fridge up there as well. But we're gonna crack open this side here, take a look at what we got. And so, looks like we just cleaned out a little bit here, so there's not as much in there as there often is, I will say. But on the top here, these are collard greens, and these are specifically for the spiny-tailed lizard. Has kind of a specific diet with the collard greens that we give her, so she wants them very fresh, so she gets those. The middle bucket here generally is where most of our greens are going to be living, but we have a melon in there right now just because it's a little too big for our normal fruit bin. So, like I said, normally greens are what are targeted with this bin, and so you can see we have a tub of lettuce in there and some more, it's like romaine there probably, that's in there as well. Go a level below that, we have our fruit and our veggie bins. which are, say, looking a little thinner than usual right now, but so we just did a cleaning out of stuff that was getting a little past prime in there, which we got to do every once in a while. We got to go in there and do a cleaning of the fridge. But Harmony's going to get us restocked, I'm sure. They have yet to fail us. A couple things in the door. We have this tin here, just actually has some wet dog food in it. And so a lot of our, we have a bunch of omnivores here, mostly like lizards. And so dog food and cat food is actually great for feeding museum animals. You know, you might not necessarily think about it, but it's meat that comes canned, so you can store it for a long time. Also has nutrition facts right on the can generally, which is valuable information. We also have a couple tins of mealworms here for our insectivores, which we're not going to be feeding out. The other thing we have in the door here are a couple jars of these orange cubes. And these are food for the crickets. And so we don't really have the crickets out on the floor as an animal to be viewed and experienced by the guests, but we do feed crickets to a lot of our animals out on the floor. And so during that time, we have a tank of crickets behind me here, and these guys need to be cared for so they're not all dead when I go in there to take them out and feed to somebody out on the exhibit floor. I'm gonna take these out. I'll do some mountain too. So I asked Angie to bring her scale down for the birds. I generally don't do by weight with the reptiles. I'm not operating on that fine of margins with the reptiles generally, that I really am that concerned about the actual weight in grams of the food we're giving them. I just kind of eyeball it as an amount. But like I said, these types of scales are something that you will see in most kitchens and most places like this, where you're getting the weight, so generally pretty close to down to the gram. Side. All right. You can see we just have some basic kind of kitchen implements here. I got a cutting board, got a knife, we got a spoon. This mug is, we'll give them frozen veggies sometimes, and so we use this mug to thaw those veggies out. So just take a handful, throw them in there, put them in some water, and zap them in the microwave there. So we have a microwave down here as well. Like I said, we use it mostly for veggies, but the other one that uses the microwave are the snakes. And so the snakes generally like to have their food presented to them at least warm, if not hot. And so the rats live in the freezer side. So we got bags of rats in there. And so when we feed them out, the way I prep them is I get them out in the morning. I put them in a bucket of water, so you can see we have an ice cream bucket here labeled snake feeding only. So the only thing that ever goes in this bucket is frozen rats. Soak them in some water from the time I get here in the morning, about 9:30 until 3:30 when the show happens. And then right before I head out onto the exhibit floor, I'll toss them into this casserole dish and put them in the microwave for a minute or two, like I said, just to get them warm. And again, just like our refrigerator, we have a very distinct, this is a food prep, an animal food prep microwave that is distinct from our break room microwave and our upstairs microwave that are for human food. Because, I don't know, people get a little upset when they're like, oh yeah, the last thing I microwaved in there was a pile of dead rats. People tend not to like that when you're prepping human food. The other thing of note that we have back here is these little cards. And so, this is something I made for people who are kind of just getting into feeding the animals. And so, just kind of guidelines for the types of foods that the different animals can get. Like I said, we're not as precise here with what we're feeding and how much we're feeding as most places are. Like I said, because we're kind of beholden to just whatever produce we end up with, because we generally don't buy it ourselves. And so what's a lot of the times more important from our perspective is more the what can't you feed end of things. So we want to make sure that we're not feeding out anything that could be potentially toxic to a given animal. And so these cards are there as research that I've done as far as what things are good for the animals to be eating. Like I said, but I don't have it down there to the mixed veggies, the bearded dragon gets this many grams of it. So it's fine for the bearded dragon to get mixed veggies. But, like I said, I don't go that precise with it, just because we don't go that precise with anything but the raptors, really. But I think what we'll do, like I said, I have my bed of Timothy hay here for our tortoise. I'm going to give her some greens as well. And some of this is just volume. Like I said, she hibernates for half the year, so she tends to wake up hungry. She tends to want to eat a lot of food. But obviously there is a nutritional element to this too that we're trying to maintain. And so one of the things that a lot of these dark leafy greens have that is good for them is calcium. Is generally what we're targeting there. And you'll see most of the animals that we have that are getting fed on Monday, Wednesday, Friday are getting leafy greens as like the lion's share of the diet. Like that should be the biggest part of the diet for most things. Reality is that like we have like apples, and you'll see a lot of critters will get apples, and I'll cut up a little piece of apple for the turtle here. But things like this are, kind of more snack food. They're kind of junk food for a turtle. And so there's a benefit to it from, like I said, kind of a volume perspective, like filling the plate, letting them have their belly filled. There's also a benefit to it from what I was mentioning there on the enrichment point, enrichment side of things, where presenting them different foods, giving them different presentations of the same food is valuable just by virtue of like, hey, this is a new thing that I haven't experienced before. Gives your turtle an active mind. And we got to do that more with certain animals than others. So like Angel, for example, gets very different food from day to day. She's pretty loose with the types of like fruits that she can get, and so anytime I'm feeding her, I try and make sure I'm not giving her the exact same dish of food 2 days in a row. We'll do some berries too. A couple raspberries. I think we'll hold off on the tomato for her. I know she had a little bit of tomato on her plate this morning, so we'll hold off on that for her. And we'll give her a nice chunk of melon. I love melon. Melon's great. It's something that you can feed pretty much across the board to anybody. And it's really nice, particularly for animals like the bearded dragon and the turtle, because they generally aren't going to be drinking their water out of their dishes. They get their water from the food that they eat. And so a nice wet food like a hunk of melon is a great thing to give them, because it's going to, like I said, give them that water that they need. So, chunk of melon there.
Hey Ryan, will you send me that blue?
No. So, sounds like Peggy's gonna go to Harmony and get more food for us.
Thanks, Harmony.
Shout outs to Harmony.
Thank you, Harmony.
And that is a pretty good looking plate of food for a tortoise. As I said, we have our Timothy hay on the bottom, we have some leafy greens, and then a couple different fruits on top for, like I said, the fruits are kind of snack food. They're, I like to call it enrichment, but it's kind of junk food if we're being honest. And like I said, this is her second plate of food for the day, so there's like a calorie need there that we're meeting, and we're making sure that she's getting lots of different types of food for the sake of both enrichment and for nutritional needs as well. Did I point out the cricket tank?
Yes.
We have our crickets that live in there. There's a few in there right now. And so they're kind of weird because we do have to take care of them as well. And like I said, we have the cricket food for them. You might see there's also just a chunk of an old pear in there for them as well. But the crickets we have here, we typically keep for, we buy them about a week at a time, basically. So I don't have to survive them there for too long, but if you don't do anything for them, they're not going to make it that whole week. And a lot of the animals won't eat dead crickets, so there is a certain care standard that we need to maintain with the crickets as well, just for the sake of keeping them usable for the other critters out on the floor. The other big benefit of feeding your crickets is this idea of what's called gut loading, and that's what those orange cubes are more about, is doing gut loading. And so the animals that are eating the crickets are getting the benefit of the nutrients that the cricket has eaten as well. And so if you feed them something that is very rich, very nutritious, a meal that is, like I said, more nutrition than what they need, those nutrients are going to stay in that cricket for a little while before they, get processed through. And so when you feed that cricket to a gecko, now the gecko gets all those nutrients as well. So we kind of spoil our crickets, kind of fatten up, spoil our crickets for the benefit of the animals that eat them further down the line. But I don't think we have a long enough extension cord to get all the way back out to the tortoise to see us put that plate out there. But the desert tortoise is going to be getting this, Sunny, who is a tortoise that if you come and visit us here in person, you are more than welcome to visit with. Like I said, she is awake right now, at least for the next couple months. She's probably going to be going to bed here. I mean, we're coming up towards fall. It's getting there. It's end of July almost. So yeah, swing by sometime in the next couple months and visit with Sunny, and she'll probably have a plate out in her pen that's going to look pretty similar to this. But otherwise, the Headwaters Science Center right now is open 7 days a week. We're open Monday through Saturday from 9:30 to 5, and then we're open from on Sundays from 1 to 5. And so if you swing by at 3:30, we might be doing one of these shows. You might be invited to come and participate or watch. This isn't one that we necessarily did that with because we're kind of tucked in behind the scenes back here where there aren't any guests. A lot of times we'll be doing these shows out on the main exhibit floor, and we love having guests to come interact with us. We love getting questions from the audience and answering those and interacting with you guys. I love my internet audience as well, but there is a certain element of in-person interaction that I miss sometimes. And so, I think that being said, again, shout outs to Harmony Co-op.